Welcome back. We are in 2 Samuel chapter 13. Um, David has just gone through the very difficult period in his life where, as prophesied from the Lord, his son would die because of his sin with Bathsheba and murder of Uriah the Hittite. We're going to find out some more information here in a couple of classes about Uriah the Hittite. I didn't know, I wasn't really not aware until I had studied this series out that Uriah the Hittite was actually one of David's personal guards, one of his mighty men. And so that really, in my opinion, makes that transgression all the worse. But so he had Uriah murdered. He committed adultery with Bathsheba, Uriah's wife. Does eventually marry her after Uriah is dead, but the child that is conceived because of the union of David and Bathsheba dies. And the Lord does grant Israel, the country, victory in the battle against Ammon. Ammon is enslaved. They take over all the cities of Ammon. The crown of the king of Ammon was Hunan, I think, or Hanun. They take his crown, they place it on David's head, they spoil the city, and so on, a wealthy city actually, thereby increasing the wealth of Israel as a nation. And so David, after that, returns to Jerusalem, and as part of the prophecy against really the house of David, not just David himself, David's sin would be repeated, sadly, but exaggerated. And that is something that we see quite frequently. The sins of the fathers, Exodus tells us, are visited upon the children of the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. And we do see generational sins, and that's something that we've talked about in times past when we talked about spiritual warfare. We talked about breaking generational sins and how to go about doing that, and that is a whole other discussion I do not have time for this afternoon. But we're going to see David's sins of murder and adultery, his sexual sins, are going to be exaggerated in the next generation, and we're going to take a look at one of these stories here. Very, very sad thing. As the curse or the prophecy that was given by God through, I believe it was Nathan the prophet, to David, because of his sin, was that his house would be divided. And this is about to come to pass right here. God sees, or rather David sees his house divided as God promised it would be. And we see that in 2 Samuel chapter 13. So let's read beginning in verse 1. And it came to pass after this that Absalom the son of David had a fair sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon the son of David loved her. That word love there is not really actually love. You'll find this out here in just a minute. And Amnon was so vexed. The love was a vexation. It was really a curse to him. And it will eventually cost him his life. Amnon was so vexed that he fell sick for his sister Tamar. Now, this was his half-sister. So the same father, King David, different mothers, all right? For she was a virgin. And Amnon thought it hard for him to do anything to her. And Amnon had a friend. Be careful who your associations are. Your friends will influence you one way or another, and you need to be careful that the people that you habitually associate yourself with are good people. People of God, people who will lead you in the right direction and give you good godly counsel and tell you the truth even when it hurts sometimes. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful, Solomon, David's son, says in the book of Proverbs. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimei, David's brother. So this was actually a cousin to Amnon. And Jonadab was a very subtle man. He just had that character quality about him that was He was always getting away with something. He was kind of like a snake oil salesman, a used car salesman, right? If you're any used car salesman, I'm sure that doesn't apply to you. Anyway, and he said unto him, Why art thou, being the king's son, lean from day to day? Wilt thou not tell me? And Amnon said unto him, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. So again, yes, they were stepbrother and sister. Again, had the same father. And Jonadab said unto him, Lay thee down on my bed, and make thyself sick. And when thy father cometh to see thee, say unto him, I pray thee, let my sister Tamar come and give me meat, and dress the meat in my sight, that I may see it, and eat it of her hand. And Amnon lay down and made himself sick. And when the king was come to him, Amnon said unto the king, I pray thee, let Tamar my sister come, and make me a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat at her hand. So here we have, now there are some cultural things here, so we're not going to get into all of them, so some of this may feel a little strange to us as we go through the story. But the Jonadab, Amnon's cousin, says, hey, I know how you can take care of this. And they start scheming as to how he could have his way with his stepsister Tamar. Verse 7, Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, Go now to thy brother Amnon's house and dress him meat. So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, and he was laid down. And she took flour and kneaded it, and made cakes in his sight, and did bake the cakes. And she took a pan and poured them out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, Have out all the men from me. And they went out every man from him. And Amnon said unto Tamar, Bring the meat into the chamber, that I may eat of thine hand. And Tamar took the cakes which she had made, and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. Now, I mean, he seems awful bossy, and you know, this seems to be an odd situation. I really think Tamar was a good-hearted person. I think she really genuinely was concerned for her stepbrother. Oh, she's sick. My father has asked me to do this. Absolutely, I'll take care of him for a little bit while he's not feeling well, and he'll get better, and that's the end of it. Sadly, this is not what happens here. Verse 9, continuing the second half, and Amnon said, Have out all the men from me. They went out every man. And Amnon said unto Tamar, verse 10, Bring the meat into the chamber, that I may eat of thine hand. And Tamar took the cakes which she had made, and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. And when she had brought them unto him to eat, he took hold of her, and said unto her, Come lie with me, my sister. Now, this, my sister, and again, when we went through the Song of Solomon, we talked about the Solomon called the Shulamite woman, Shulamith called her his sister. They were married, and obviously we were talking about marriage activities between them, and yet he calls them his sister, and that was, in that culture, a terminology for somebody you loved. I think he's being coy. I think he's using this terminology as a form of wordplay here. And you're my sister, my stepsister, and my sister. Hey, I kind of got a thing for you. And again, that's gross to us. It is. It's gross to us. And I do believe, actually, by this time, it was certainly forbidden to sleep with your siblings of your parents, step or not. Come lie with me, my sister, verse 11. Verse 12, and she answered him, Nay, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing ought to be done in Israel. Do not thou this folly. She's begging him, please don't violate me. She's a virgin, and she's his sister, and this is the royal house. So all Israel shouldn't do this, and we certainly of all families in all of Israel ought not to act this way. Verse 13, and I, whither shall I cause my shame to go? And as for thee, thou shalt be as one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore, I pray thee, speak unto the king, for he will not withhold me from thee. She actually, to save her own embarrassment, was willing to say, hey, listen, go to our father, ask for permission to marry me, and he won't have a problem with that. Was that true? Excuse me. Was that true? I don't know. But it seems to me like Tamar maybe is really grasping at straws to save herself, maybe, and who can blame her? Certainly, who can blame her? But so she says these things to him. You'll be like one of the fools in Israel. Verse 14, howbeit he would not hearken unto her voice, but being stronger than she, forced her and lay with her. Pardon me. Then Amnon hated her exceedingly. You know why Amnon hated her exceedingly? because Amnon didn't actually love her to begin with. It wasn't love, it was lust. And when what he felt, when his lust was not satiated upon acting upon his lust, the object of his lust did not fulfill him, left him unfulfilled, and obviously the problem is her. So he hates her. And time and again, how often do we find ourselves in a predicament where we crave after something inordinate? Maybe it's food, or maybe it is another person. Maybe it's a purchase that you really shouldn't be making. Excessive spending when we ought not to. And later on, you just had to have it, and you knew it was going to satisfy your lust, and you get that thing, or that you enter into those actions or whatnot, and only to find that they are empty promises, unfulfilling, and you actually hate yourself. There's that term buyer's remorse, right? Could be applied to most of those situations where you get yourself into a set of circumstances where what you thought would satisfy you turns out to be only very, very empty. And Amnon certainly has this experience with his sister. He loves her. He's got to have her. And so they work out subtly. Amnon and his cousin Jonadab work out subtly to make sure he can get her. And he plots and he schemes, and finally he rapes her. And after the act is over, he finds he hates her, because no person can fulfill what we want. We can't even fulfill our own lusts. Lust, when it conceives, brings forth sin. Sin, when it is finished, brings forth death. And that's the only place lust takes us. Sadly, he does this. Then verse 15, that Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred wherewith he hated her was greater than the love wherewith he had loved her. And Amnon said unto her, Arise, be gone. He just throws her out. Throws her away like a piece of garbage. Verse 16, then said she unto him, There's no cause. This evil in sending me away is greater than the other that thou didst unto me. But he would not hearken unto her. Then he called his servant that ministered unto him and said, Put now this woman out from me, and bolt the door after her. He just tosses her out into the street after he uses her, abuses her, and then throws her away. And I mean, that really speaks to the character of Amnon. And this is going to become a very, very this is going to create a lot of problems for Amnon. I don't want to do any spoiler alerts here, but this is going to cause a lot of problems for Amnon here later on. So what happens? Tamar goes into open mourning. Amnon's servant throws her out into the street. She puts ashes on her head. She tore her expensive robe that only the royal daughters who were virgins wore. She puts her hand on her head and weeps openly in the street. Her full brother Absalom, who we'll talk a little bit more about later in a couple of classes, takes her in. And we find that David's anger is kindled against his son, but he does nothing. Verse 21, but when King David heard all these things, he was very wroth. And that's it. He's mad. And he takes no actions against Amnon. So David is angry but does nothing. Verse 21, verse 22, and Absalom spake unto his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had forced his sister Tamar. So basically, Absalom completely ignores his half-brother Amnon, but bides his time. He will do some things, and we'll see this here in a little bit. He will take some revenge later on. But rather than dealing with the issue, David leaves it alone. David just ignores the problem, and ignored problems never go away. Here we see Absalom doesn't address his hatred and his bitterness for Amnon, his half-brother, his stepbrother, half-brother. And so, undealt with bitterness will always lead to a miserable life. And it may not ever get quite so bad to where you actually do some of the things we're going to find out Absalom ends up doing, but it will ruin your life. Bitterness against somebody never harms that person ever. but it does you a great deal of damage. And so we see that Absalom just kind of keeps his feelings to himself, doesn't talk about them to anybody, doesn't go to his father about the problem. David finds out, he's angry, does nothing, and it looks like Amnon's just going to get off scot-free, and that feeds the fire of Absalom's bitterness and sense of revenge within him. And so he plots to avenge his sister's purity. Look at verse 23. And it came to pass after 2 full years. So Absalom harbors this hatred of Amnon for 2 years. 2 years he mentions nothing. 2 years he does not talk to him. 2 years he just nurses this hatred and this bitterness and formulates a plan. Came to full 2 years, Absalom had sheep shearers in Baal Hazor, which is beside Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. And Absalom came to the king and said, Behold, now thy servant hath sheep shearers. Let the king, I beseech thee, and his servants go with thy servant. And the king said to Absalom, Nay, my son, let us not all now go, lest we be chargeable unto thee. And he pressed him, howbeit he would not go, but blessed him. And I think David knew something was up. We're going to find out Absalom is he's a charmer. He has a hard-to-refuse personality. He's one of those people that's just a likable guy. And he's kind of like the quintessential politician. He knows how to say the right thing to get you, to manipulate you, to do what you want, and you don't even know you were manipulated. And until it's too late, and we'll see that actually plays out in a situation later on in Absalom's life. But he waits 2 years to exact his revenge, and he invites all the king's sons to like a sheep shearing festival or a banquet in Baal Hazor. David didn't really want to let all his sons go to Baal Hazor, and I think he knew something in Absalom's personality, Absalom's heart was had some mischief devised within him. But David does eventually consent and allow it to continue. Verse 28, Now Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, Mark ye now, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say unto you, Smite Amnon, then kill him. Fear not, have not I commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. So he plots. Didn't David kind of do something similar? Let's get Uriah drunk, and then he'll sleep with his wife, and then everybody will think that he fathered this child that is Bathsheba's. And we see that this pattern is now repeated in David's life, only instead of David killing a close friend, we see Absalom killing his half-brother. Yeah, that's his family. We've moved from friendship to family. Sin always increases in intensity. Always. Always. Verse 29, And the servants of Absalom did unto Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and every man gat him up upon his mule and fled. What's Absalom going to do? You got to remember that this was what you might call a less civilized time, and it was not uncommon for Oriental kings to do away with the remainder of the family, so there would be no opposition to them attaining the throne. And here Absalom openly kills Amnon. The other king's sons are likely thinking, am I next? And they get out of Dodge. Verse 30, And it came to pass, while they were in the way, the tidings came to David, saying, Absalom has slain all the king's sons, and there is not one of them left. Well, that's not exactly what happened. Be careful about listening to the news media. They're not always going to give you the full story or the correct story or the right version or their version of the story. Did some sons die of David? Yeah, one of the sons died. And were there any left? No, they weren't left, but that's just because they left, not because they had left Earth. They had just left Absalom's residence and took off. So there's a bit of spin from this news reporter, and we see David's reaction to it. The king arose and tare his garments and lay on the earth, and all the servants stood by with their clothes rent. And Jonadab, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, answered and said, Let not my lord suppose that they have slain all the young men for the king's sons. How'd he know? For Amnon only is dead. How'd he know? For by the appointment of Absalom, this hath been determined from the day that he forced his sister Tamar. He's playing both sides. I mean, this guy's a creep. He's an absolute creep. Now, therefore, let not my lord the king take this thing to his heart, to think that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon only is dead, but Absalom fled. And the young man that kept the watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there came much people by the way of the hillside behind him. And Jonadab said unto the king, behold, the king's sons come, as thy servant said, so it is. And it came to pass, as soon as he made an end of speaking, that behold, the king's sons came and lifted up their voice and wept. And the king also and all his servants wept very sore. David mourns the death of his son Amnon. And also, I think he mourns the relationship he desired to have with Absalom. I say that knowing what's going to happen in the future, having studied out this life of David already. But I think there was not just a death of Amnon, but a death of a right relationship, or a death of the possibility even of a right relationship between Absalom and David. And we know that, again, he's one of those charming individuals. And he charmed his father too. And we'll see that as we go along, and he will eventually reveal his true nature. We'll see that in a little bit. But even at his demise, David is just tore up. Absalom was kind of a favorite, I think, of David. The king's sons return in great mourning. Absalom flees to Talmai, king of Geshur, and remains there 3 years while everything kind of cools down. Verse 39, and the soul of King David longed to go forth unto Absalom. Even though the relationship is broken, he yearned for Absalom. Absalom was something special. Absalom had that charisma. Absalom had that everybody's favorite kind of a personality. For he was comforted concerning Amnon, seeing he was dead. Now wait a minute. This was not up to Absalom to exact this revenge. He really felt Absalom was justified. He saw his homicide as justifiable for Amnon's wickedness. Really, I don't know that it was his place. It doesn't seem like it was his place. If we had to have all this subtlety, if we had to have all this going behind the back and setting up banquets with secret motives, and it seems to me like if this was the right way to do it, we wouldn't have to go to all this work to get it done. So I think David shows clear favoritism here, and it's really going to be a serious problem for him as this continues. So he hides out for 3 years, or he leaves the kingdom for 3 years. David brings him back, but sends him to his own house and does not see him. And I think this is a political move. This has nothing to do with David not really wanting to see Absalom, his son. I think this is a political distancing of association for himself. You got to remember that for the first good bit of David's kingship, his kingship was called into question, and I think this was maybe a political maneuver, but it's really going to backfire on him. We know that Absalom was known for his looks. I mean, he had everything going for him. He had personality, he had looks, he had courage. Clearly, he had skill, cunning, really, but skill in working out problems and getting things happening, and even in manipulating people's hearts and thoughts and minds and emotions. And we'll see that he is like this as we continue on and get to know him a little more. Absalom has 3 sons and a daughter, which he names Tamar. And there's just, you cannot pay me enough money to think that's an accident. That girl was named for his sister. There's just no other way to explain it. And so he names his daughter Tamar. Absalom's kind of getting bored, and I mean, although he's obviously old enough to have children of his own, when children get bored, they get naughty, and we see that Absalom craves his father's attention. I don't think he understood the political wrangling altogether that was going on here. David, it seems, is not communicating with his son Absalom. So Absalom can't see his heart. And we see that Absalom, who obviously is quite skillful in holding and developing and nurturing a grudge, begins to think the worst of his father and begins to scheme at how he can get back at him. And so he starts doing some really, really horrible things. Absalom's 2 years in Jerusalem. He actually brings him back to, in fact, let's go look at verse 28, chapter 14 and verse 28. Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem and saw not the king's face. Therefore Absalom sent for Joab, David's captain, right, to have sent him to the king, but he would not come to him. And when he sent him the second time, he would not come. Therefore he said unto his servants, See Joab's field near by, and he hath barley there, go and set it on fire. And Absalom's servants set the field on fire. And Joab arose, came to Absalom unto his house, and said unto him, Wherefore have thy servants set my field on fire? And Absalom answered Joab, Behold, I sent unto thee, saying, Come hither, that I may send thee to the king, to say, Wherefore am I come from Jeshurun? It had been good for me to have been there still. Why did I bother coming to Jerusalem if my father's not even going to see me? Now therefore let me see the king's face, and if there be any iniquity in me, let him kill me. So Joab came to the king and told him, and when he called for Absalom and came to the king, bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. So we see Absalom, generate some mischief to get his father's attention. This is gonna be important later. Now not only have these family problems stayed within the family, he now gets David's general involved. And this is, I think this is the seed of Joab's own bitterness and resentment and hatred of Absalom right here. When he sets his fields on fire, he's made the royal issues part of his own issues, and he never gets over it. I believe Joab harbored this bitterness and this grudge for the rest of Absalom's life, and we'll see that as we continue. Verse 33, the king kissed Absalom. David relents, gives an audience to Absalom, and really he's been played. Absalom was willing to take it as far as he needed to get his father's attention, and really, as Amnon's lust for Tamar was unfulfilled when he got what he wanted, I think Absalom's, I'm hesitant to call it lust, because the family should certainly communicate with one another and express love to one another. But as far as Absalom goes, Absalom was like, I've done nothing wrong. I killed my brother because he raped my sister, and if the king thinks I've done something wrong, then let him kill me. But let me see my father's face. And so I think Absalom is confused. He doesn't understand the political situation. He feels like David perhaps has put the kingdom above his family, and so he's bent on causing some mischief. So he not only has he created problems for David's authority structure, he's not going to create some legitimate political problems for David. Starting in chapter 15, Absalom steals the hearts of the people by persuading them that he would have been on their sides. I mean, he literally would stay outside the courts, and when he'd find out which one David ruled for and what side, the defendant or the plaintiff, and if the plaintiff lost, he'd cozy up the plaintiff and say, I totally get your grievance, man. I cannot believe my father, ruled against you. I mean, you have a clear case against this person over here. If the defendant lost, he'd cozy up to the defendant and be like, I cannot believe the king will not protect your rights. Unbelievable, he'd say to him. That person was clearly violating whatever, and this is the game he played for quite some time, and in doing that, he stole the hearts of the people. So Absalom leaves Jerusalem and goes to Hebron and begins to exact his revenge on his father. And we see that Absalom lives a life of revenge and bitterness and hatred and scheming for the rest of his life. And this life pattern that starts way back is a pattern that will ultimately take his life. So we see that Absalom begins to orchestrate a coup d'etat from Hebron. Let's start reading in chapter 15 and verse number 10. Chapter 15 and verse number 10 says this. We'll start reading in verse 14. Let's start reading in chapter 10, verse 10. But Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, ye shall say, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. And when Absalom went 200 men out of Jerusalem that were called, and they went in their simplicity. They knew not anything. So 200 men, Absalom had 200 men ordered into Hebron, presumably as guards, I suppose, but they didn't realize what was going on. This they did, it says, in simplicity. They were unaware of Absalom's schemes and ideas and what he was planning to do. Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, even from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices, and the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. So Absalom's formed a government. He's forming a government. He's forming a small army, and he's forming relationships built on his charm and his wit and his personality in opposition to his father. And there came a messenger to David, saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom. And David said unto all his servants that were with him in Jerusalem, arise and let us flee, for we shall not else escape from Absalom. Make speed to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly, bring evil upon us, and smite the city with the edge of the sword. David knew that once Absalom's heart was turned against somebody, he would see happen what he had designed to happen. And David had the wisdom to flee from even before his own son. He knew him well. He knew the resolve he had. He knew that he was deadly. He knew the charm that he could use to manipulate others to do his bidding. And he knew that if Absalom was to sneak into Jerusalem with his men and take over, he said, we would not be able to survive. So we've got to leave. And so he flees. David flees Jerusalem with his guard, with his household, and with the Ark of the Covenant. It's at some point in this time of David's life that he writes Psalm 3. So I'll turn over there really quickly. Psalm 3, David pens these words. A psalm of David when he fled from Absalom his son. Lord, how are they increased that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me. Many there be which say of my soul, there is no help for him in God. Selah. And when he says many, he means most of Israel that had their hearts turned from him to Absalom in opposition of him. But thou, O Lord, art a shield for me, my glory, and the lifter up of mine head. I cried unto the Lord with my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill. Selah. I laid me down and slept. I awaked, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people that have set themselves against me round about. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. For thou hast smitten all mine enemies upon the cheekbone. Thou hast broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongeth unto the Lord. Thy blessing is upon thy people. Selah. And David expresses a marvelous message of confidence in the protecting hand of God when it seems like everything around him is against him, when his own son is out to kill him, when he's lost the heart of the nation, he is out hiding from Absalom. He pens these amazing words of trust in God. Beautiful, beautiful words. 8 short verses, but wonderful, wonderful expressions of trust in God. So David decides to use the Ark of the Covenant as a test of the blessing of God in his life. He orders it and the priests back into Jerusalem to be kind of inside eyes into the city, really, almost like spies, really. Let's look at verse 25, chapter 15, verse 25. And the king said unto Zadok, who was the priest, carry back the ark of God into the city. If I shall find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me again and show me both it and his habitation. But if he say thus, I have no delight in thee, behold, here am I let him do to me as seemeth good unto him. The king also said unto Zadok the priest, art thou not a seer? Return into the city in peace, and your 2 sons with you. Ahimaaz thy son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar, see, I will tarry in the plain of the wilderness until there come word from you to certify me. Zadok therefore and Abiathar carried the ark of God again to Jerusalem, and they tarried there. And David went up by the ascent of Mount Olivet, and wept as he went up, and had his head covered, and he went barefoot, and all the people that was with him covered every man his head, and they went up weeping as they went up. And one told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. And it came to pass that when David was come to the top of the mountain where he worshipped God, behold, Hushai the Archite came to meet him with his coat rent and earth upon his head. So David decides to send the ark of God in. We'll return the ark to the tabernacle where it belongs. But in so doing, I'm going to get some of the priests who are on my side in as some kind of inside eyes and ears into the city to see how things are going and to kind of get some information. We see that David sets up his exile headquarters on the Mount of Olives and begins to implement some counterintelligence. Ahithophel's in on the conspiracy against David, and David prays against him and against his counsel. So David sends Hushai back into the city, plants him in Absalom's court as a spy, and he let him know who his confidants were. These are the people you can trust: Zadok the priest, Abiathar the priest, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son. And these are the people that you can trust. He let him know who his enemies were: Ahithophel. And so Absalom the usurper occupies Jerusalem. Verse 37, so Hushai, David's friend, came into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. And he occupies the capital city of Israel and wants to sit on the throne of his father. Moving into chapter 16, then, we come into a very interesting story. The friendship Jonathan and David had back several chapters now is going to come into fruition, and we're going to see David continues to want to bless the house of Saul. The house of Saul. Saul was the Lord's anointed, and David never forgot that. David also never forgot Jonathan and the promise he made to Jonathan. And so we're going to take a look. Remember, he searched out, is there any of the Jonathan's house that I can show kindness to him? Mephibosheth had been saved, had been rescued, but dropped as a child, and he was lame from that point onward. We see that Mephibosheth is now going to take David's part. He's going to give him some assistance in his time of need. And when David, verse 1, chapter 16, and when David was a little past the top of the hill, behold, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of asses saddled, and upon them 200 loaves of bread, and 100 bunches of raisins, and 100 of summer fruits, and a bottle of wine. And the king said unto Ziba, what meanest thou by these? And Ziba said, the asses be for the king's household to ride on, and the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine that such as be faint in the wilderness may drink. And the king said, and where is thy master's son? And Ziba said unto the king, behold, he abideth at Jerusalem. For he said, today shall the house of Israel restore me the kingdom of my father. Then said the king to Ziba, behold, thine are all that pertaineth unto Mephibosheth. And Ziba said, I humbly beseech thee that I might find grace in thy sight, my lord, O king. And we see a tender display of affection between David and Mephibosheth now, and David and Ziba, Mephibosheth's servant. And he lets him know that Mephibosheth's family, the house of Saul, is actually Mephibosheth's son. Sadly, sought power and a possible inroad to reestablishing Saul's line as king. Verse 5 says, and when King David came to Bahurim, behold, thence came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, and we're not done with him, by the way, the son of Zerah. He came forth and cursed still as he came. And we see this is kind of a funny story, but so David's retreated to Bahurim. Shimei, a descendant of Saul, mocks and openly accuses David and throws stones at him. And Abishai wants to kill him. He gets all upset. I think Abishai, if my memory serves, is actually Joab's brother. But Abishai wants to kill him, but David gives him some perspective. He says, my own son wants to kill me. What more grief can this Benjamite cause me? He said, let him go. And he does. And actually, we see Shimei play a part a little bit later on. Verse 15 then, Hushai entrenches himself in the inner council of Absalom. Look at verse 15. And Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. And it came to pass when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, was come unto Absalom, that Hushai said unto Absalom, God save the king. God save the king. He's playing the part, right? Verse 17, and Absalom said to Hushai, is this thy kindness to thy friend? Why wentest thou not with thy friend? Absalom suspicious, how come you here and not with my father? Verse 18, and Hushai said unto Absalom, nay, but whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel choose, his will I be, and with him I abide. I am loyal to the throne of Israel. And if you're on the throne of Israel, Absalom, I'm loyal to you. He's playing it up. He's playing the part, doing what he has to do to remain in Absalom's inner circle and to gain his trust so that he, in turn, can feed information back to David. And again, verse 19, whom should I serve? Should I serve in the presence of his son? Should I not serve in the presence of his son? As I have served in thy father's presence, so will I be in thy presence. Then said Absalom to Ahithophel, give counsel among you what we should do. So Ahithophel gives some really awful advice. He advises Absalom to defile his father's concubines that David had left when he fled Jerusalem to keep the palace up. So Absalom spreads a tent on the roof of the palace and rapes his father's concubines. Now, this is not just a vile act, but first, he's all upset at Amnon for raping his sister Tamar. But this is okay. You see where our bitterness takes us? You see where our hatred takes us? You see where our scheming takes us? You see where doing things in our own power takes us? It doesn't even make sense. It's not even good sense. But this is what he does, and he follows Ahithophel's awful advice. He further advised taking an army of 12,000 and pursuing after David and his men, killing David and striking fear into others so they would not desert. And this advice pleased even the elders of Israel. And it pleased Absalom as well, but he wanted to get a second opinion. I have a hard time thinking Absalom was hesitant to go after his father because he loved him. I think, given the opportunity, I think Absalom probably would have killed David. That's my personal opinion. You may differ. It's not said in Scripture, but he goes after him for some reason. And here David, who had to run from his father-in-law, has to run from his son, also in much the same way. But Hushai gives some much better advice in chapter 17, verse 5. Then said Absalom, call now Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear likewise what he saith. So he's going to get all the pieces of information and put them all together in one pile of putty and see what he can work out. So he advises him. And in verse 6, and Hushai has come to Absalom. Absalom spake unto him, saying, Ahithophel hath spoken after this manner. Shall we do after his saying? If not, speak thou. So he says, this is what Ahithophel said. Let's, if you have a differing opinion, I'd like to hear it. So talk. Here's your chance. So verse 7, and Hushai said unto Absalom, the counsel that Ahithophel has given thee is not good at this time. For, said Hushai, thou knowest thy father and his men, that they be mighty men, and they be chafed in their minds, as a bear robbed of her whelps in the field, and thy father's a man of war, and will not lodge with the people. Behold, he is hid now in some pit, or in some other place. And it will come to pass, when some of them be overthrown at the first, that whoever heareth it will say, there is a slaughter among the people that follow Absalom. And he also that is valiant, whose heart is the heart of a lion, shall utterly melt. For all Israel knoweth that thy father is a mighty man, and they which be with him are valiant men. Therefore I counsel that all Israel be generally gathered unto thee, from Dan even to Beersheba, which Dan was the northernmost city in Israel. Beersheba was the southernmost city in Israel. So he's saying, from one end of the country to the other, from Dan even to Beersheba, as the sand that is by the sea for multitude, and that thou go to battle in thine own person. So shall we come upon him in some place where we shall be found, and we will light upon him as the dew falleth on the ground, and of him and of all the men that are with him there shall not be left so much as one. Moreover, if he be gotten into a city, then shall all Israel bring ropes to that city, and we will draw it into the river, until there be not one stone found there. And Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. For the Lord hath appointed to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, to the intent that the Lord might bring evil upon Absalom. So we have kind of a spoiler alert right here in the biblical text. The Lord intends to bring evil upon Absalom. David plants this guy, and he gives differing counsel. Ahithophel wants to send 12,000 men after David to kill David, and Hushai says, wait a minute, David's not going to go to some city. He's not going to live in a community. He's going to go out in the wilderness and hide in the rocks and the woods and the pits and the ditches of the wilderness, and they're going to take out a bunch of people. These people come back defeated, not having captured David or killing him, and even the strongest-minded man is going to be afraid. You lead the charge. You go out, and you clobber them, and you'll be successful, essentially, is what he implies in what he says. He disagrees with Ahithophel, and like I said, he says, these angry men of war are not going to be easily scared off. David's going to camp separate from his men for safety's sake. David's men will attack in two parties and will cause the reputation of Absalom's army to suffer among the people. So Absalom personally leads the nationwide manhunt for David, from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south. Absalom and the elders of Israel accept Hushai's advice because God put him, because they thought Ahithophel's advice is good, remember? What changed their mind? God changed their mind. It says God put him in that place for the purpose of bringing judgment upon Absalom. And I'm put in mind of what Mordecai says to Esther, who knows, but thou art come to the place for such a time as this. And David, you could say he had some counter scheming, although David had right to be king of Israel. He was the anointed king of Israel, placed in that position by God himself, rightful king. And so counterintelligence is, war is different. Thou shalt not kill, yes, but war does call for some different rules. And the Bible, the law of Moses gave rules for how they ought to war and how they ought to take prisoners and how and who they ought to kill and who they shouldn't. And David does nothing wrong here in planting a spy in Absalom's government, and it pays off big time. So Hushai gives him this counter advice: lead the attack personally, and he says that's a great idea. Now, we're right in the middle of this, but this is where we're going to cut off for now, for this class. And we'll pick it up in the next class. And we see what happens when Absalom goes after his father David.